She once said, "If you feel like you don't fit in this world, it's because you're here to help create a new one." Wanda Sykes didn't shout that quote. She didn't write it in a book or stitch it on a pillow. She lived it. Every time she stepped into a space that wasn't built for her, every time she chose to stay visible in a world that prefers people like her to stay quiet. That sentence wasn't just a reflection. It was a survival strategy, a compass for anyone who has ever felt like they were too loud, too honest, too different to belong. Wanda didn't set out to inspire. She set out to survive. But there's something about truth that turns into a lighthouse. People start to follow it. They lean in. They remember it. Because when you live in your skin unapologetically, when you refuse to laugh off your pain for someone else's comfort, your very existence becomes a challenge. And for some, a blueprint. Her life has never been about slogans. It's been about decisions. About walking into writers' rooms where no one looked like her and saying what needed to be said anyway. About being called too angry, too political, too much, and showing up again the next day anyway. Wanda didn't wait for the world to make space for her voice. She carved it out, inch by inch, with humor sharp enough to cut and honesty deep enough to stay. One of her most haunting truths came disguised as a joke. "I'm not a fan of the police, but you know what's even scarier? Not being able to call them." It was a line that made people laugh nervously. But underneath it sat a truth that millions of Black Americans feel in their bones. The systems meant to protect you can also destroy you. And being forced to rely on what you can't trust, that's trauma, not comedy. Wanda didn't use that line to shock. She used it to say, "I see you. I live this too." She made space for contradiction, for being both grateful and furious, both proud and exhausted, both tender and razor-sharp. And in doing so, she gave the rest of us permission to stop being neat, to stop being simple, to own the complexity that lives in all of us. Because sometimes inspiration doesn't come from someone telling you to rise. It comes from someone showing you how they refuse to fall. She wasn't trying to be perfect. That was never the goal. Perfection, for Wanda Sykes, was just another performance, another costume you wear so the world doesn't flinch when you walk in. But the moment she stopped reaching for perfection and started speaking from the scar, everything changed, she said. It's not about being fearless. It's about being afraid and doing it anyway. That line wasn't written for a script. It was carved from her own decisions. Decisions to speak up when the room wasn't ready. To come out when it could have cost her everything. To be fully herself in a world trained to reward masks. That's what makes her different. Wanda doesn't hand you empowerment like a gift. She hands it to you like a mirror. She holds it up and says, "Here, look, this is what it costs. This is what it gives back. You decide." Because her power doesn't come from being loud. It comes from knowing exactly when to say nothing and exactly when to say something that no one will forget. Her words live like echoes, not because they're loud, but because they're true. In another set, she said, "You can't be a Black woman and not be political. I'm political just by standing on this stage. It's not a soundbite. It's a sentence soaked in exhaustion. In the reality that identity, for some, is never neutral. That just existing becomes an act of resistance. That just showing up, in your body, in your truth, in your hair, in your voice becomes political even when your intention was simply to breathe. That's what people don't always understand. Wanda's jokes are funny, but they're not escapes. They're invitations to look closer, to feel deeper, to stop laughing just long enough to ask yourself why you're laughing. She builds her routines like architecture, every beam reinforced with lived experience, every wall lined with double meaning. And somewhere in that structure is a message that sticks, that waits, that wakes you up 3 days later when the smile fades and the truth stays. There's one quote she gave in an interview that never made it into her act. It wasn't designed to go viral. But it should have, she said. When I stopped caring if I was welcome, I finally felt at home. That's not just a line. That's a threshold. A before and after. The moment you stop begging for permission and start building your own peace. And for anyone who's ever sat in a room wondering if they were too much, too loud, too different, Wanda's life is a reminder the room was never the measure. You were. Not everyone celebrated that shift. In fact, many recoiled from it. The more honest Wanda became, the more the world tried to box her in. They called her too political, as if that was an insult, as if naming what hurt you made you bitter, as if pointing to injustice meant you no longer belonged in the category of comedian. But Wanda never asked to be boxed, and she refused to be palatable. She knew that some laughs came too cheap, and she wasn't interested in earning them at the cost of her voice. There's a lesson in that, one we often overlook. We're taught to compromise ourselves in small ways to be accepted, to lower our voice a little, to round our opinions, to laugh when something hurts because it's easier than explaining why. Wanda did that, too. In the early years, before the clarity, before the cost became too much. And then she stopped. She drew a line between what was funny and what was true, between being liked and being respected. When she said, "The truth doesn't always come with applause," she wasn't trying to be profound. She was being real. Some truths leave a silence in the room, a discomfort. But that discomfort is where change begins. That moment right after the punchline when the laugh dies and the thought lingers, that's where her genius lives. In the pause, in the echo, in what you carry home after the show. Wanda's comedy doesn't teach you how to avoid pain. It teaches you how to carry it, how to turn it, how to name it so it loses its power. Because you can't heal what you won't face, and you can't transform what you're still pretending doesn't hurt. That's why her words stick. They don't demand that you be fearless. They demand that you be honest. She once said in an interview, "I don't need everyone to agree with me. I just need to sleep at night." That sounds simple, but it's radical. Because in a world built on performance and approval, choosing your own peace over their applause is revolutionary. It means valuing your inner world more than the outer reaction. It means telling the truth even when it shakes the room, especially when it does. That's the kind of inspiration Wanda offers, not the shiny, social media kind. The kind that forces you to ask better questions about who you've been trying to impress, about what parts of yourself you've been silencing, about whether your comfort is really worth your silence. She doesn't tell you to be brave. She shows you what it costs to keep hiding and lets you decide for yourself whether the price is still worth it. There's a kind of strength that doesn't raise its voice, a strength that stands in the corner of a room and says nothing until it needs to. And when it does, it shifts the temperature. That's the kind of strength Wanda Sykes carries. Not loud, not fragile, just unshakable. She never tried to be anyone's inspiration, but the more she spoke plainly, the more her words took root in people who were tired of pretending. She said, "I didn't come here to make you comfortable. I came here to be myself." And in that sentence lives a choice that most people never make. To stop performing, to stop waiting for permission, to stop shrinking. Wanda made that choice not once, but over and over, every time she stepped into a room where no one looked like her. Every time she wrote a joke that didn't land because it was too true. Every time she said what she needed to say and let the silence that followed do its work. Her bravery didn't come from a desire to stand out. It came from being tired of disappearing. She knew what it meant to be seen, but not heard. To be praised for your wit, but ignored when your pain showed. To be welcomed for your comedy, but rejected when your truth got too close. That's why her most powerful words often come when she's not even trying to be profound. When she's just tired. When she's just done pretending. She once said, "It's exhausting being the only one in the room who has to explain everything." And if you've ever been the only one at work, in a classroom, at a table where your presence is both celebrated and misunderstood, you know exactly what she means. Her lessons aren't motivational quotes. They're lived reminders. That clarity doesn't come from comfort. It comes from friction, from tension, from saying the thing that might not get applause, but might give someone else permission to breathe differently. Wanda doesn't push you to rise. She dares you to stop falling in line. There's a quiet rage beneath her humor, not the kind that destroys, the kind that reveals, that pulls the curtain back on the polite lies, that shows you what you've been calling normal is actually just practiced denial. That's why people either love her or get uncomfortable. Because she doesn't ask you to agree. She asks you to look. And that's harder, she once said. Being a comedian means telling the truth in a way that makes people feel it before they realize it. That's what her best lines do. They slide in like jokes. They sit in your head like ideas. And they stay there like warnings. She never begged for agreement. That was never the point. Wanda Sykes didn't offer her voice so you could clap. She offered it so you could confront your own. That's what makes her words last. Not because they're polished, because they're precise, because they come from a place most people spend their lives avoiding. The place where you're not trying to be understood anymore. You're just refusing to be erased. In one of her stand-up moments, she said, "I'm not homophobic. I'm not racist. I hate everybody equally." It's a line that gets laughs, but it's laced with irony, because underneath it is a mirror. A commentary on how often people say those words to dodge accountability. Wanda uses humor like a crowbar. She doesn't break the door down. She pries it open slowly, with just enough pressure to let the truth leak out. And when it does, it's never clean. It's complicated. It's messy. It's real. She never claimed to have all the answers. In fact, her best moments come when she admits she's still figuring it out. She talks about parenting, about marriage, about being a black lesbian woman in America, not as a finished product, but as someone still navigating it all. And that's what gives her words weight. They're not conclusions. They're confessions. She's not telling you what to do. She's telling you what it took her too long to stop denying. She once said, "I'm not trying to change your mind. I'm trying to keep mine." That line doesn't fit on a t-shirt. It's not meant to. It's meant to sting. It's meant to make you stop and think about how many times you've made yourself smaller just to keep the peace. How often you've translated your pain into jokes just so people wouldn't walk away. How long you've been compromising your clarity in exchange for someone else's comfort. Wanda reminds you that you don't have to be loud to be heard. But you do have to be willing to lose something. The illusion of belonging, the applause from people who only like the version of you that doesn't ask for too much, the safety of silence, and she's lost all of those. But what she gained was herself. Her story isn't one of triumph over adversity in the traditional sense. It's a quiet war. One fought in green rooms and behind microphones, in interviews and boardrooms, in the moments when she chose not to soften the truth just because someone else couldn't handle the weight of it. That's the real lesson. Not that you should be fearless, but that you should stop apologizing for your fear. Let it walk with you. Let it speak with you. Let it shape your voice. Just don't let it silence it. What Wanda Sykes teaches us without ever standing behind a podium or writing a manifesto is that power doesn't come from performance. It comes from presence, the decision to stand exactly as you are, even when the room wasn't built for you. The decision to speak truthfully, even when you know the cost. And most of all, the decision to stay visible, stay honest, stay whole after they've tried to reduce you to a punchline or a threat. Her comedy has always been layered. You laugh first, then feel it later. That's her signature. But beneath that rhythm is a deeper architecture. It's not just about what she says, it's about what she refuses to leave unsaid. Every line, every moment on stage, is a piece of a larger truth that authenticity will always unsettle those who are comfortable in illusion. And that's exactly why it matters. One of her most personal reflections came when she said, "If you're going to be honest, you better be funny, because the truth hurts." That wasn't a joke. It was a blueprint, a way of surviving in a culture that demands politeness over pain, charm over challenge. She learned that if she could lace her truth with laughter, people would listen longer. But she also knew the risk that they might laugh and miss the point entirely. So she made sure the point stayed, buried just deep enough to reach you when you least expect it. And it always does. Her words don't ask for your admiration. They demand your reckoning. They make you consider the masks you wear, the things you don't say, the weight you carry in silence. And then they dare you to choose differently. Because Wanda didn't rise by being agreeable. She rose by being undeniable. And that's the difference between a voice that fades and one that stays with you. She stayed. Even when the room went cold, even when the headlines twisted her words, even when the world told her to tone it down. She didn't. She turned it up. Not the volume, the truth. And now, we're left with her legacy. Not just her comedy, but her courage. The sentences that sound like jokes, but sit in your chest like warnings. The lines that say, "I'm here. I'm real. And I'm not asking anymore." We don't remember the people who tried to make everyone feel safe. We remember the ones who made us feel seen, who showed us that freedom doesn't always look like a fight. Sometimes, it looks like a woman standing under a spotlight, telling the truth with a smile. Wanda Sykes didn't come here to inspire you. She came here to free herself. What you do with that is entirely up to you.